It's second Future State Guide event where we try and deep dive in every topic that we're trying to cover with help of Congress. There was really a lot of questions. Why Cyprus? Why we choose Cyprus? Why we are coming to Cyprus? And that is why. We also want to answer this question to everybody. And that is why we invited such a really cool guest. I don't want to make it official. It's just cool, because the space and making something in space is just cool. And that is what I really love to do. And that is why I'm really love what we are doing. Because we're trying to put so diverse audiences with so diverse interest to this event. And space. I really didn't like to be an astronaut in any time on my childhood. But right now it's became even better idea right now. Because right now we have so many problems on Earth. Maybe in some way it can be a solution to just go to space. Let's start maybe with introduction with Kyriakos George A Danos and where they broadcasting right now.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. So we are actually at the Cyprus Space Exploration Organization headquarters center. And what's even cooler about this is that we have our sample and a moon sample right behind us. So we are really getting the vibes of the international space ecosystem here in the room. So a bit about myself. I come from a scientific background. I did molecular genetics at school at King's College London. And there I had the chance to really get into the synthetic biology space that was really upcoming, and the DSci space as well. So a lot of decentralized ideas were creeping into the scientific research method to try and find different ways that we can incentivize research and how do we actually build a better future through science. And I spent a couple of years roaming around, working at different DAOs, some different startups in drug discovery and so on. And about a year and a half ago, I happened to go to Zagreb on the first weekend, which was Blockchain Meets Bio, where I had the chance, I was introduced to the idea of a network state and how different networks around the world, especially scientists, can leverage technology to build really cool stuff, but also make an impact in this world that we're living. And I really thought to myself that, if we are to actually build all this cool technology and make it accessible to everyone, we will need some sort of bridge between this network and an actual nation state. And that's, okay, I'm from Cyprus, so I'm already in love with the island. But I find it so attractive in piloting this emerging tech and being like a launch pad of these new frameworks of doing governance and building technology. So I came back and I started working with Invest Cyprus, where our goal is to promote different projects and different strategic infrastructure projects that Cyprus needs in order to step into the future. And that's how I met George Danos. Actually, when he was launching the COSPAR, of the Center of Excellence around space, together with NASA. And I guess he can introduce more of what Cyprus is doing in the space sector and how he's celebrating this whole movement.
Fantastic, Kyriakos. My name is George Danos. I'm the president of the Cyprus Space Exploration Organization, and at the same time, the vice chair for the innovation panel of the International Committee on Space Research. That's basically the International Space Research Organization. And that's what Kyriakos said a moment ago, that it was in late June that we made the big announcement that COSPAR, the International Space Research Organization, announced that it's launching here in Cyprus its first International Space Innovation Center. And that has to do everything with what you said before. If we're going to go to the moon, if we're going to have sustainable utilization of the moon to bring solutions back to Earth, you need to have a location that helps bridge and unite nations, especially this day and age where we have multiple complications down here on the ground. So this innovation center of COSPAR is facilitating the right type of research, cooperation, is uniting nations, and at the same time is trying to bring innovative solutions to multiple problems, not necessarily just the problems of space, but space to bring solutions to the earthbound problems. So in order to do that, we had to utilize our past connections and or career. So myself, I was working for Richard Branson when I was in London. So the knowledge from there, the connections from there are very relevant to what we need to do here in this International Space Innovation Center.
Actually, when we met first time, hey, maybe we can make something cool on the Congress itself. And we thought about making a space selfie. And George A Danos says that, yeah, it's possible, why not? And it was very surprising for us. I think it's really cool because right now we have so many problems on Earth, and then sometimes looking at it from our point and our solution is not the right way to do this. And what is Danos said that space can bring solution to here to Earth. It's quite very reasonable. Maybe we can a little bit dive deep on what is Cyprus is doing right now, and what is space already provided for us on Earth to establish good solutions for governments or just in science and etc. And what is the role of Cyprus of it?
Do you want to go for that, or should I?
So I can talk a bit more about the role of Cyprus on how we go into space. So essentially, Cyprus is, as George Danos says, it's a very special place because of what's happening around us. Because of all the instability in the region, there needs to be a place that can showcase how, let's say, nations come together and cooperate on common issues. And because Cyprus is also an island, these common issues can, the solutions, let's say, that will be used as solutions can also be applied to space. So, for example, energy is like a big issue for Cyprus, and currently, connectivity, electric connectivity of there is like a big topic at the moment. So we're trying to, connect Cyprus with the region to be more secure in terms of energy access, but also these, present Cyprus as a potential test ground for future energy systems or microgrids that you will need to design in order to either create a new state, a new city, or maybe a colony in Mars. So, I aiming for, making Cyprus as a pilot for this emerging tech and space, we can actually translate all of this technology both on Earth and in space. That's what the goal is. Now the government is putting a lot of incentives in place to actually get there. So first, even though Cyprus is not really a special economic zone of sorts, it has a lot of these characteristics, like very favorable corporate tax systems that you can, if you're making big investments, you can benefit from. But also, moving into the digital space, there is the intellectual property regime at the moment that rewards, risk takers that are willing to develop some really competitive IP. And in this way, we're putting out the incentives actually to get into this future.
If I try to answer the same question from a slightly different perspective, what we saw as an organization is a country that has a very long history in different aspects. If you go back 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, Cyprus was a center of commerce, of distributing to the known world at the time, the Mediterranean world, copper. And hence the name of copper is coming from Cyprus, Kypros. But if you fast forward to today, you see certain things happening here in Cyprus, which you don't see elsewhere, at least within Europe. We have the highest percentage of university graduates per capita. This shows that it's a great talent on the island. Then when we started having certain competitions, we found that within 10 years of running these competitions at the level of NASA, we had 8 international wins from this country. And then when we went to NASA, they were asking, how is it possible that a small country like Cyprus, with less than 1 million population, has had 8 global wins within 10 years? So it shows that there's this thriving ecosystem, there's this talent, there's this innovation going on. And you need to stimulate all of that. But at the same time, Cyprus has got this unique location. It's friendly with different nations, whether they are north, south, east, or west. So therefore, it's the right place to attract people to cooperate and put aside all these differences that we see happening. So, for example, in everything that is happening around us right now, I can easily see people from each direction being able to work on science, on the future of the planet, on sustainability. So all these elements are the right reasons why we are doing what we're doing, and we're doing it here in Cyprus. And it's also the right reason why the International Space Research Organization chose this country to host the first such innovation center that is being created on the planet.
And also to add on the importance of location, I feel while eventually build a launch pad, European launch pad, you need to be quite south.
Yes.
So Cyprus is the south point of Europe, and you need a lot of mass of sea on the left.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Cyprus is actually positioned perfectly to be a rocket launcher for Europe.
Yes.
So I think we have the potential as a country to have a big impact in Europe and the world.
Another part that I think is really interesting with relevance to the Future State Congress, how space law is such a tenuous, underspecified and problematic area, and something that really needs looking into. So, and updating. For instance, I think if I'm right from memory, the last treaty was something like 1967, the space treaty. I've forgotten the exact title of it. It's been changed recently. And at that time, it was only considered relevant for nation states. There was no such understanding or belief that a private company could put a rocket into space, which means if one of these things crashes or falls down or kills someone, there is no law which can allocate blame to a private company, because private companies are not part of that framing of the current law. And then there are all sorts of other things like space junk and issues of land and property on other planets and all the sorts of things that need to be sorted out. It's a bit like that kind of classic moment in time with the blue marble, the photograph of the first time mankind looked at itself, exploring space law and what we want for that as we're imagining the situations in the future reflects back on the issues of ownership, property, land, cooperation, international treaties and so forth, that we can then kind of retrofit and say, well, if we agreed there, or if we discussed that and came up with that, why couldn't we actually apply that back home, if you like? So it's a fascinating territory to explore. And maybe, George, you want to outline the situation with the proposal of getting a committee together around space law and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I think it was either 2020 or 2021, we were hosting here in Cyprus the Moon Village Association Symposium, and two substantial announcements were made back then. The first one was the Global Experts Group for Sustainable Lunar Activities. That's basically what the name says, a group which brings together all the important nations, large nations, but also smaller nations that are dealing with how are we going to all work together on the moon, hence the sustainable lunar activities, and see how we can cohabitate or cooperate and get everything right, legally, governance, and everything else. And from that, bring solutions back to Earth. Then the next year, another announcement was made that the International Moon Day is going to be celebrated from the United Nations, and we made from this very room that announcement, and we then celebrated last summer the International Moon Day for the whole of Europe from here in Cyprus. So with these roles that Cyprus is playing, the Global Experts Group, Sustainable Lunar Activities, International Moon Day, etc., it makes absolute sense to now formulate a new committee, a committee that will discuss something novel, something futuristic. How are we going to create, if we go 2,500 years ago where Greece invented the democracy, is democracy in its current form the correct governance for all these things that we're speaking, like we're going to be colonizing planets, we're going to be bringing resources, things, society, AI, etc., are changing the way we understand our everyday life. So we need to reinvent certain things, to modernize certain things. So therefore, we will be proposing a committee at the international level to discuss these matters and see where we can actually go with that to have some breakthroughs for the future of humanity.
I remember when we first talked about this, that the International Astronomical Federation has like 120 committees about everything in space, other than
except this, yes.
Space governance.
Yes.
I think it's a great opportunity to
yes.
put an umbrella over this and like a framework for these different committees to work together and actually allow us to build space.
Yes. And that's, of course, something that we will be working very closely with you guys in order to get this right.
And so as an experimental space, we couldn't really think of a more futuristic, yet grounded in science, experimental space. And it might seem sort of surprising to consider, but when you look at the techniques and the methods that we currently have devising new laws, they are usually ones which don't involve all of us. They're highly specialist debates with lawyers and technicians, and also the processes themselves are fairly archaic. They're not very well informed by science. The interface between law and science is classically super problematic. I mean, that's why we still have lie detectors and things like this. It's like the actual rational basis for a kind of the epistemology, if you like, the legal epistemology is still thousands of years old. So that's why at the Congress we're also going to be experimenting with new forms of assembly, citizen assembly, and using methods where you take things like a documentary, where you imagine scenarios and you workshop them with diverse stakeholders and you draft legislation imagining that. That is basically the imaginative act of science fiction, imagining a future which hasn't been built, which might be 50, 100 years in the future, and then deliberating amongst an audience of readers, if you like, or participants, now that we have this fabulous kind of video, deliberative, universal, globally accessible, internet-based media, engaging a scientifically representative demos, again, going back to the ancient Greek there, right, to rationally or creatively craft the sorts of laws we want in space. And that bringing together of kind of documentary, assemblies, innovation, creativity in this kind of science fiction framing where we could use all the marvels of Hollywood, of special effects to really picture and have these embodied experiences of what it might be like to experience this particular threat or this danger or this opportunity, what the forms of interhuman or interplanetary competition or jealousies could be, different scenarios, think them out before they happen and use that to more rationally plan legislation. That practical experiment, but at the same time creative thought experiment, which is really engaging for people to get into that kind of imaginative space, can, I believe, teach us a lot of lessons about how we should be drafting all law on our planet.
And there are multiple questions to be asked here. For example, I was reading a paper about 2 weeks ago. What is the right form of voting in governance? Is it the system that is being utilized in the UK, the USA, in Cyprus, Greece? What's the right system? So
that's medieval. That shit's medieval, you know.
Yeah. None of these systems are really relevant today because they're being manipulated by not just the social media, all the things that we know about, but let's say that you have 3 candidates, and the most popular and the most voted candidate is getting the most votes, but they have to get more than 50%. So then the second candidate has a new coalition with the one that lost, and then the one who was most popular doesn't win, and the other one wins. So basically, you don't get the most popular candidate to win. So you have multiple problems in the logistics of voting, but that's not the only problem. Think the voters. Do they really care about what they're voting? Have they even done their homework? Are they experts in what are the problems? Or are they voting with different incentives and whatever they read in social media, which might be not their most important problems? So you have all these things to discuss. And then, of course, you have the equity, equality, poverty, small nations, large nations. You have all these different complications in the picture that you have to take into account. Basically say that whatever you come up with for the future is much more modern than what we have observed the last 100 years, 200 years, 2,000 years.
And possibly much more ancient as well, because we obviously have to bear in mind that in ancient Greece, voting was very rare. I think it was only applied to some specialist committees like the military, and it was to do with expert panels voting. But nearly everything of meaning was through a deliberative, performative process and sortition. That was how you got the engagement and participation of people. Voting was extremely rare.
And when you go to vote, you have like 2 opposing opinions, let's say. Well, you said you need 42 opinions.
Voting is gambling with truth. You just place your bets. People you've never met, and you have no real access to their character, who they are, and it's mediated by effectively advertising.
Yeah, there are some very interesting science fiction series that I remember one. It was it Twilight Zone or something, the modern Twilight Zone or something similar to that, and it was this kid which was just making lots of jokes on television, and everybody liked him and voted for him, and then he was elected president of the United States. And this is science fiction. And it's a really, really interesting 1 hour episode, which shows, is this the way that society is heading towards?
We've seen the debate with Kamala and Trump. I mean, it's, you know, it's all about trying to capture show the attention span of the voters.
Yeah.
Maybe we can come up a little bit with sci-fi, and I'm really interested what George is thinking about 100 years ago. And what it come with all this baggage that we have right now, and how it will be in 100 years ago. So in 100 years, we will be colonized the Mars, the Moon, or will be going somewhere else. What do you think? How it will be?
100 years time.
Very interesting question. I'm going to start slightly different on this one, Ray, by saying that if you look at society today and the competences of society, and even if you just go back to the 60s, where within, 10 years, all the necessary technology was built to go back to the moon. And where are we today? Are we capable of being as innovative and as productive, as efficient as people only just back into the 60s, not so far away? So it looks like society is losing its edge. People are not as Renaissance people as they were. We are either too focused, or the information we absorb in our brain is more about social media and entertainment, and not those things that really, really matter. So the reason I said this first is how, with such a society, with such competences or lack of competences, are we going to get it right to go and colonize the moon and or colonize Mars? Now, let's assume that we do get it right and we do go to Mars. There's going to be a myriad and one problems, from what's the connection going to be between Mars and Earth? How are we going to terraform the planet if we manage to do that? And it's going to be very challenging. Create an atmosphere, because as we know, the atmosphere of Mars now is very thin, very cold, and very low in oxygen. So you can't survive in that environment. Then you have the radiation of the sun. Then you don't have a fertile ground because you don't have water to nourish the plants that you have there. So therefore, everything has to be within greenhouses. So all these problems have to be solved. And then on top of that, let's say that you have meteoric events. Things come down, micrometeorites, and you have your domes, and they hit on the dome and they explode the domes, or puncture the domes, and you are leaking air. So you have so many problems to solve in order to get it right. So
I'm a big fan of Enceladus, so yeah, I don't believe in Mars. Yeah, there are dolphins, clearly dolphins in Enceladus. There's phosphorus there and everything. Just build a sub; it'll be cushy.
You're right about that. And actually, you have Enceladus, you have Europa, and recently I was reading a paper which was actually saying, forget about Mars, think about Titan. That's the right place. So there are loads of theories. You know, what might be the right place to set the first colony. And then again, it can't be just the only place. There are so many places that you have to consider. So what I was basically saying here is you need to start changing the education, the innovation, the incentives, the input that people are getting from their everyday environment, and make enough changes to the way we see things. For example, our children today are not looking up. They're walking in the streets and they're looking down on their phones. Is that how they perceive the environment around them? Are these the children that we will basically rely upon to build the lunar and or Martian bases? So all these problems, and also what's driving society today isn't necessarily achievement, legacy, a bright future, cooperation, peace. It's not all these things anymore. It's how much money I'm going to have in my account and how successful I'm going to be economically. That cannot be the only factor of our future. So there's so many things to be discussed in order to get it right, in order to have these amazing futuristic bases on Mars, Enceladus, Europa, Titan, and or further away to the nearest stars.
I also think that space governance committee and like making government structure from scratch to in such a toxic environment where you like everything want to kill you is something that can make sense, because when you're making governments and like election in such an atmosphere, you're trying to cut everything that not a solution. You're trying to cut everything that kind of like social experience or something like that. You're trying to thinking in first principle thinking, and that is also can be a solution to invite or research new ways of governments, how it should be or how it could be. And what I want to talk about also, it's why Cyprus? Yeah, and why we are doing this on Cyprus? Why Cyprus can be as a solution? Because we have like US that investing so fucking much money on that, and already have so many private companies doing that. We have other nations that's thinking about that, and why Cyprus can do this right now.
Yeah, so as you said, if you are under pressure or in extreme environments, you are pressured to take the most optimal decision for your survival and the survival of the group. And like before I said why Cyprus, when you were saying that, I thought of or someone wrote it in a Telegram code somewhere that new forms of governance will arise out of necessity rather than someone imagined a new solution. And this is the same situation for the Ukrainian or the Belarusian diaspora that are spread around the world, when they are facing challenges and they need to make decisions for the survival of that community. But coming down to why Cyprus and how Cyprus can be a model of cooperation, I think it's we have a very unique geopolitical situation in Cyprus. We had the Turkish invasion in 1974, which left the island split in half, essentially, between two communities, and now multiplying as years go on. But we actually still have the last divided capital in Europe. So if you are going to find a way that you can allow people under stress environments to cooperate and govern their resources that they have available. I mean, we're still on the same island, so we have limited resources that eventually, we are sharing at the moment, but it's not in the optimal way of doing it. So if you are going to design such systems, I think Cyprus can be a perfect example. And of course, if we manage to find a solution to the Cyprus problem, that would shout to the whole world that, there is a new way of doing governance. There's a new way that can allow people to come together and cooperate and build a future state for themselves.
It's a very interesting way of seeing things. And what you're reminding me now is that if you're under stress, and the same goes to even the human body is healthier under some stress, as opposed to if the body is just relaxed and then it's starting to deteriorate if it's too relaxed. So call it complacency. So Cyprus has got this challenge that you mentioned. It's got the challenge of the climate change, that it might be become a desertification. But at the same time, because it's a small island and it's a small island country, we're always trying to prove ourselves, and we're trying to convince everybody else that we are worth it. And sometimes we're overcompensating, over-trying. And I was just having a conversation with very good friends in the United States, and they're basically saying to us, how are you innovating like that? Why is Cyprus achieving so well? Can we invite you to teach us a few lessons in the United States? And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. So it's this thing about if you reach a certain level and you are achieved, you're slightly more relaxed about where you are, call it complacency or other. But if you're trying to get somewhere, you're trying and trying and trying, And that's why you're achieving things that it wouldn't be like expected from like a bigger players. And there was this statistic 10 years ago. They were asking the European Union member states, do you believe that your country should be involved in space? The most achieved countries in space, namely France, Germany, and Italy, the population of the country was basically saying, no, we don't care to be involved in space. Then the other extreme, the countries that had the least involvement in space, Greece, Cyprus, and others, they had the most interest in getting involved in space. So you have this reversal in how people approach things. So that's what makes Cyprus excited. The population is really engaging the topic. The past experiences of the civilization of Cyprus going back to, 10,000 years of civilization, all those lessons, we have to go back and revisit the knowledge and bring it to the future and make it relevant. So all these different reasons are the answer to the why.
Thank you.
I think the size of a place is really, really important. So if you look at, let's say, the size of, Athens in 5th century BC, the population there, where democracy was invented and all those innovations, it was about, I think, 250 to 500,000, something like that. If you look at other areas which have pioneered new forms of democracy and innovated them at speed, whether it be, let's say, Iceland, I think that's about 250,000. If you've got Estonia, I think that's a couple of million, I'm not sure, something like that size. I don't know what's this population of Cyprus now?
About a million.
Yeah, so when you have that kind of size, and you're much more agile. It's like the difference between a shrew and an elephant or something like that. If you want to evolve, you want to iterate, you want to experiment. And when you also have some pressing, like you say, stresses or problems that need to be addressed or solved, you have both the pressure and the consciousness in the population that something needs to change. You also have the kind of exciting feeling of pace and what you can do rapidly in the future. And in the end, the thing that slows everything down is the time it takes for a number of people to come together and make a decision. It's not like, you don't have enough petrol, or you don't have enough computers, or you don't have enough. It's literally a kind of exponential problem of size in terms of governance innovation quite often. It can't be too small, it can't be too big. So yeah,
this is exactly where we are bringing Future State Congress in Cyprus. That's why I invited Ray and David in the first place, because I think we have the pedigree and the DNA to do it. We just forgot how to do it, let's say. So it's time for us to take initiative. But yeah, a bit about Famagusta and Ayanaba. I think for me, it's a place close to my heart first. That's where I grew up. But it's when it comes to governance structures, I find it a very interesting place because it's a region that is first half is occupied, and there is no city center in the region. So in the three areas, I don't know how to translate in English. It's just villages and towns, which really bring some of the problems of decentralization, not so much of the solutions, but problems, because there is a constant, let's say, fight between villages and the towns of, who's in charge, who's the biggest city, who's making the decisions, and so on. But that is beginning to change. In the last few years, we have a new model, let's say, for the regional authority in Cyprus, where it gave more power to these local regions. So the government is trying to move towards a more decentralized system. Of course, this needs some time to be implemented. But this gave us an opportunity to actually bring together these mayors and local authorities with the help of a non-profit in Famagusta, which essentially is not a DAO yet, but it's something of that structure. So you have like a common vision for the region, and then each participant can voice their opinion and then gets rewarded on their actions. What we're doing now and what we want to get out of the conference as well is to involve Famagusta more into EU funds that have to do with infrastructure. And because it was left so much outside because of this decentralized character, it has the potential to sort of like leapfrog and avoid some of the problems that other cities in Cyprus face, like Limassol or Nicosia, with has a based from different problems, let's say, that big cities that were designed in the 60s have. And so, that's why I think I like Famagusta specifically is a very interesting space. And I think another very interesting characteristic of the region is the ghost city of Famagusta.
Oh, yes. It's a very interesting one.
It's, I say ghost city, and most people might not really believe that it's a ghost city, but it's been left empty since 1974. So after the invasion, and this city used to thrive in the 60s and 70s. It used to be you had like hotels by the beach, like towers. You had tourists. You had
big names visiting, like known from the Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. It was like the Miami of Mediterranean, and then it just went away. You can actually see the city. It's like empty, staring at you from the distance. And there are like solving the Cyprus problem. It will eventually mean that we will need to reopen the city at some point. And the European Union actually has an open proposal now that if there is a plan to design Famagusta into this sustainable new city, it's willing to support it financially, but also politically. And this is like a commitment from the commissioner back in 2010. So I think, overall, I think Famagusta would be the place where, this new form of democracy can here, but also solve local problems for, local people.
May I add that it's the also ideal destination to meet because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, it's got these most gorgeous golden beaches, which are like a small paradise.
I think there are pictures on the Future State website.
Yeah, love to see the pictures. And in the first Future State event we did quite a lot on together with the Open Systems Lab on different property ownership models. So we showed the Atlas of Ownership, which is a kind of historical and future archive of looking at all sorts of legal forms of ownership of land going back from thousands of years to present and documenting sites. And the ghost town in Famagusta sounds like that kind of contested space, like in space, in on the moon, as well as situations in other conflict zones. It's such a big problem where a diaspora, people have left their homes. It's now 50 years or 100 years later, the right of return, who owns that, how can you cooperate, how can you develop it? And our legal frameworks of ownership, you own it, I don't, and how you can cooperate in that emotional and historical conflict, we just haven't even begun to innovate in that space. I mean, we have begun. There are some things we can now talk about. So while you were talking, George and Kyriakos, I was Googling to see like citizen assemblies, Cyprus, So classically, whether it be an island over the abortion issue or other areas of high social contention where it's been a stalemate for a long time, opening up that deliberative process to citizen assemblies, it's quite surprising how much easier it is to often get those, to always, that I've seen in terms of the evidence of actual deliberations that have been convened. It's easier to get those on-the-ground facilitated deliberations to come up with a consensual, constructive agreement than it is political chambers or classical institutions, which are basically like tanks. They're like war machines for political power, and it's quite difficult to do anything but the crudest form of power corporations there. Well, when you bring citizens who, lost family, own property, businesses who want to invest, academics, local politicians, and you get them to speak from the heart in a facilitated way, you can really make some breakthroughs that way. And I was also looking at, because I've got a few pictures here on the kind of on Solon, the lawgiver, and his visit to Cyprus and what have you. And I was looking just before coming here at Soloi, the different pronunciations, I think in Greek and Turkish there. That town that he built on his return from Egypt in Cyprus that he designed, that's like a new town. That's like these new builds that we're talking about in the network states in Ukraine or in other places. It's a completely new build that Solon built like 2,500 years ago. And it's right on the border. It's right on that contentious border of north and south there. So I'm thinking, I want to visit that. I don't even know if I can visit it. I don't know what. I've never been to Cyprus, so I'm really fascinated to know what that situation is. But there was a theatre there, a deliberative space in that town. We could convene or propose convening a citizen assembly. From what I Googled, there have been some talks about the methodology and what have you, but I don't think there has yet been a properly facilitated one. So making that proposal, whether it be for space, whether it be for Famagustra, whether it be for other conflicts, and getting the principles around that governance done and opening up that discussion is really an opportunity that I think we have with the Future State Congress in Cyprus. I'm just wondering what thoughts you have about how we could open that deliberation up. And can I go and visit Soloi? Is it possible?
I believe you can.
Yes.
Go and visit.
You can.
I want to.
I've been to see Famagusta from the outside because it's got all this barbed wire around it. It's fenced and you cannot go in. And it was a few years back that I went to visit. As soon as there was this arrangement that we could go and visit the occupied north. And I remember it was a major shock to my system. My memories go back when I was a small child and I was running on the golden beaches and running to go and swim in that beautiful crystal water. And going now, almost 50 years later, and just seeing this gorgeous city that one day was buzzing full of all the names from James Bond, Sean Connery, and all the rest of the names were there. And then you see something which is out of a science fiction movie with trees climbing up on the buildings. Some of the buildings semi-collapsed and trees in the middle of the streets. It's surreal, absolutely surreal. So that alone, the impact that it has to your psyche, the impact that it has to your understanding, your brain, it's stimulating to basically say, how did we get to this? How can we change that? Why does humanity have to do these things? So it is stimulating enough to start a dialogue and a conversation for a better future.
Definitely. And well, bound the first point you made on poverty rights. And poverty rights is a big issue in the Cyprus problem. And as George mentioned in the beginning of the call, that, poverty rights is something you can more easily negotiate if you are talking about the move.
So true. So true. Yeah.
Type doesn't motion.
Yes.
And of course, there is no right or wrong on every side. Seems very passionate about their opinion.
Yeah.
History, absolutely, a very important issue that I think makes it even more of a good space to experiment with these assemblies. And another point I want to make is that this year marks the 50 years since the invasion and the separation of the island. And believe me, I'm 26, and ever since I remember, the Cyprus problem discussion is at the same place that it is every year.
Yeah.
So there's no new inputs, no new ideas, no new way of approaching the problem.
Yeah. Yes.
So if they did, these citizen assemblies can help us unlock that conversation and bring the right voices in, but in a way that makes the whole conversation move forward.
Yeah.
That would be very beneficial. Like, for example, what the methodology has been so far is that nobody talks about it. If you are not the president or the ministers, like your opinion is in between friends, between some, let's say, gatherings, but the real conversations that are had are always only between the president and the Greek president, the Turkish president. There is no conversation about the Cyprus problem from the citizens.
Yeah,
that's I feel like that's a really big problem.
Yeah, and it's a society where everybody can have their YouTube channel and their social media channel. This not being expressed is,
There is a theatre group that I'm a big fan of, European group. Actually, the director that I know of that lives in Athens, called Rimini Protocol, and they do this performance called 100% City, and it's making me smile at the moment because I'm just hearing my kids and everyone on television and media that they always say when they're in a debate, 100%, 100%. So I always think of this performance, and this performance is basically to take 100 people, which, by the way, is basically a citizen assembly, demographically age, sex mapped from the city, and for them all to speak and talk in a circle, and it's performed beautifully visually on stage about their lives. And so as an audience watching that, you get a whole beautiful story about that particular place, that particular city. So to do a performance like that on Famagustra with people who lived there and their children, their descendants, to get a deliberative assembly type sample, so all the voices are heard from people from both sides, telling their stories, talking about it, and maybe hold that event somewhere, quite theatrical and spectacular, and have a real debate around that. I think we could raise the funds for a performance and make a documentary out of it and really do it in an interesting way. And because it's so visually and compelling as a story and as a metaphor for other conflict zones and places around the world currently as well, I think it would be a great performance. And anyway.
Actually, there is a place in the Riga, which is very close to the border, that they built an amphitheater, an open amphitheater. There's like a big frame in the middle that it frames from Augusta, from the viewers' point of view. So yeah, definitely.
Sounds very interesting.
Place.
I don't know how other participants, but I already met Belarus, and I already convinced that Cyprus have kind of like the same size problem, because Belarusian community is also like very small, and we can't make like anything but to evolve ourselves and trying to put ourselves out of our possibilities. I already hear that there are a lot of also local problems that governments should be solved, and should be solved in very different ways, like citizen assemblies, and trying to maybe also state governments committee can help somehow to put it on the table. And what also fascinates me, and what we talked about, is about that Cyprus and this region became the birth of democracy, actually. And actually, what we are talking about started from this region also. So maybe we can deep dive on this topic. I believe somebody have some slides already here, and then we can have a good conversation about this.
Okay, I wouldn't say it's going to be a deep dive, but what I would say is that I've been fascinated for quite a long time when I started to get involved in different democratic tools and methods and practices, with the surprising fact that the ancient Greek democracy wasn't based on voting, and sortition and so forth, and started to dive into that story quite a lot, as well as origins of democracy from Scandinavia and other places around the world as well. It's really, really fascinating. But the more I've been diving into it, the big character that comes up all the time is Solon the lawgiver, right? And it sounds like such a good gaming sort of avatar, I adopted Solon as kind of my nickname, right, without knowing kind of the full history. So over the last couple of years, I've been diving into the history of Solon, and I want to talk a little bit from an outsider point of view of why I find this character really, really intriguing and important and interesting, and sometimes a little disturbing as well. And maybe open it up to some sort of provocations or dialogue to some people here who probably know a lot more about Solon than I do. But I am actively researching and studying it, and I want for the next year to be working with that material, the past as well as the future, in terms of the work that I'm doing with blockchain-based contracts, with human-centered law, with legal languages that I'm working on this year as part of the future state. So I'm going to try, I haven't probably got it set up properly, but I'm going to try and share here. But this is Solon. This is a selfie that he made a few hundred years after he was... so Solon was basically around the period 630 BC to 560 BC, that sort of period. So that, for a starter, is kind of stunning. I mean, he lived to 80 or 90 years old, apparently. That's the best evidence we can. Somewhere between 70 or 90. And when we look at life expectancy now, and we think about all the technology and everything we have, it's interesting to see that things haven't changed that much. And the fact that, which I didn't know until getting involved with the Congress in Cyprus, that he died in Cyprus, and he had several connections to Cyprus. That's what I've been kind of diving into. So, by the way, I don't think Solon was a selfie person. I don't think he was interested in selfies, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. This is the area at that time, and that's kind of just fascinating. Here's Cyprus kind of in the middle here, and you can just see it's between this big kind of green area here, which is the Babylonian kingdom. And that's just like, that's stunning how close it is and how surrounded it is, and what the historical and present-day context of the politics in that area is as well. And there are basically you could say four lawgivers that are kind of well-known in history. So the first one comes from this Babylonian empire. I think the sixth king of the first Babylonian Empire was Hammurabi, and that was about I remember now. It's like 1750. So It's not. It's an easy number to remember because you think that's kind of Middle Ages, but it was 1750 before Christ, right? And he was famous for really the not law is code. That was Larry Lessig more recently, but he wrote the first recorded laws, law giving down on stone. The second one was Moses, probably. Maybe that's a couple of hundred years later. And the third is Solon. The fourth that I came across on the internet is this guy, Judge Dredd. These are basically the four lawgivers that I know of, right? And one of them stands out. And the one that stands out is Solon. And Solon is completely unique amongst those lawgivers in that he didn't write his laws in stone, right? Everyone else in history wrote their laws in stone. They carved them permanently, immutably on the blockchain, right? They basically, it was either coming from me as the king, I've written them down, I want them to last, I'm ordering you to follow these laws, or it came direct from God, and it was never going to change, right? That was Moses, that was Hammurabi, that was most lawgivers throughout history. Solon was completely different, right? Solon also resonates from my journey personally because I think he was a sheepdog. So basically there are two types of dogs. There are hunting dogs and there are sheepdogs. The hunting dogs are all about me, me, me. They chase, they hunt, they go forwards, they create the laws, they write down the laws, they craft them. You must follow them. And the sheepdog is at the back of the pack, making sure that everyone is together, that the compromise there's no one getting lost and what have you. And Solon was unique in his methodology and his way of resolving conflict in terms of law, in that he looked for the compromise between parties. And famously, what he did, which is very, very rare in history, is I think it's, I've got the date written down here, it was in 594 that he was basically elected to be lawgiver at that time in Athens. And at that time in Athens, there was a huge polycrisis. It was a classic thing that actually has happened many times in history and to the present. It was a debt crisis, basically. There was a huge debt crisis, and there was a big conflict between the citizens and the aristocrats, and it was threatening to explode into a civil war. So they tried to find someone who was kind of in the middle and reconcile these two parties. The other really interesting thing about that time and Solon is that as a lawgiver, he was a poet. So the fact is that at that time, sure, laws were written down, but there were very, very few people who had the knowledge of reading and writing. And the main way that you communicated to the demos, to the population, the political population, was through oratory, was through reciting poems. And that gives the second type of character here, kind of sci-fi character. You have lawgivers and you have law speakers. That's more of a Scandinavian tradition. A law speaker is someone who orally recites the laws, who communicates the laws kind of on stage and reminds people of these laws. And what Solon did is he wrote down the principles of the laws, first of all, through poetry and rhetoric. And that's why we have so much written and knowledge about his actual thinking and his words, because that poetry survived, right? That text survived. Other people wrote about it. And I've been fascinated by poems. So for me, when I work with code and law, I want to capture those human-centered legal agreements as poems. And I was always expressing them in workshops as poems. What's the principle? What's the essence here that we're talking about? And the word poem etymologically comes from the Greek poiesis, like as in autopoiesis, which basically means to make and create. So autopoiesis is self-creation, self-making, right? And I think it's poien is the verb, which basically means to make. And and that's surprising. How does a poem, what's it got to do with making? And it meant making anything, God, in the sense that God creates, right? So it could be some carpentry, some craft, a sculpture, as well as the ability to invent and create in words. And that was the law-giving, the law-speaking act. And that was the language and the culture that Solon grew up in, right? And when he printed and published his laws and scattered it, put the signposts up round Athens, he didn't choose stone. He printed them on wood, on a temporary, mutable medium, right? And he also did it in this kind of multi-dimensional kind of pillars so that you could rotate them and you could see them from many different angles, right? And that that practice of engaging the community through oratory and poetry, writing down the laws and then putting them in public spaces on wood in the full knowledge that was going to change, depending on how the polis changed and the particular conflicts or tensions at that moment in time. That whole process of what law is about was utterly unique. It wasn't coming from God immutable. It wasn't the king's word. This was the emergence of a deliberative process, and it was mutable and changeable and fluid and creative. It was a poem. It was a legal poem. And that's why he's not one of these characters. And after he did that, I think it was in a year or whatever, right? By the way, he was an interesting character. I see him as basically kind of like Joe Biden, right? So he did a very similar thing, right? At the peak of his power, when he had written all the laws and he could have ruled as a dictator, he stepped down and voluntarily, kind of quote voluntarily, I think he was a little bit unpopular from both sides because you get shot at both sides when you try and make these compromises, right? And he had to defend it with force as well. It's got this lovely poem with him carrying a shield and defending himself from kind of both these sides. He left Athens for 10 years, right? And he went on a trip and he went down here to, first of all, to Egypt. And then he came back to Cyprus, where he just did a minor thing of building a new city. And then he went back around, and he also went to Lydia, which just sounds like a musical to me. I have no idea what Lydia was. And there's a lovely story about him and a dialogue with the king of Lydia. But it was 10 years that he was away, right? And there's very few examples of a person at the peak of their power stepping down. And this history of crisis that provoked the calling of a leader like that. And that really reminds me of what's happened with Joe Biden now and his kind of being forced to step down, or whether he did step down, and the desire and this kind of battle and this kind of debt crisis. It's in a different context and what have you, but it's very, very rare in the history that an elected or a powerful or a leader who has all the tools it is to stay in charge actually steps down. And Solon was one of those. The final thing I would say is I want to build this machine, right? This is emerged around, we don't quite know when it emerged, right? This is a computer. This is a democratic computer. I'm trying to find out when the first one was. I'm trying to find out if there's one in Cyprus. I don't know. It's called a Kleroterion. I don't know if I pronounced it right. And it's basically the computer that computes sortition. So if you have a demos of 500, that was a bit later. That is Cleisthenes, who's actually my hero. I think that guy's a fucking genius. The way he structured things is amazing, right? But the spirit of it started in Solon, and sortition started earlier than Cleisthenes. That was about, I think, Solon was 200 years before the golden age of Athenian democracy. So he laid the kind of spiritual foundations for this stuff. And it is really remarkable what he did in terms of being this sheepdog in the middle, convening between powerful forces, being hated by all sides, and managing to use law, negotiated from the different stakeholders to create a new basis for democracy, basically. And this machine, I can't for the life of me figure out how it works. This is ChatGPT figuring out how to make this machine. But basically, you have white and black balls according to the number of participants. You put in these kind of slots here, the name of every person who's going to be voted according to some system I can't work out. But if you actually try and program sortition and get it right, it's not a straightforward programming algorithm, right? So this machine computes it all. You drop the balls onto these slots or down this thing, and whether a white ball or a black ball comes out, you can pick out one of these names and read it out, and you have been elected or not, right? But that whole mechanism for sortition, we need now a kind of Web3 mobile app that allows us to pop up assemblies, micro assemblies of 42 people, whatever it is, at incredibly low cost, verifiable, provable, democratic participation, right? That you can do in your local theatre, you can do in that kind of poetry, oratory, dialogue way, right? And then gather those results, network those results, and bring them together. So a personal mission for me is to take the spirit of Solon as a sheepdog, right? To build a new platform for emergent law, and one of the first things to do is to create this way of making a device and machine which can reenact sortition. And that's also what Audrey Tang has done with AI and deliberative assemblies in Taiwan and in Finland and other places. But doing it in a way in which this marriage between theatre, documentary, participation online works and is affordable and is networkable and is scalable. For me, that's the reenactment of that same revolution in democracy that happened 2,500 years in Greece that we need at this point in history. And this history I want to know more about. I really want to dive into if I was more together, I'd read out some of the poems and the sayings, and I also want to look at the later developments there, and looking at how we can learn from that practice, the conflicts they had there, the solutions they came up with at that time. And learn from them and experiment with in the modern context is, I think, part of this kind of backcasting, learning from history, imagining the future, embodying that experience through theatre, imagination and creativity, and ending up writing the laws and the tools of governance that we want to create that empower us all to solve these conflicts that we're talking about and collaborate instead of being stuck in deadlock. That's what really releases innovation and the human spirit. And I think it's about time we got that fucking sorted.
Hopefully in December we'll have some hype on that machine.
Yeah.
I've been looking on YouTube at like there's some woman who ran an experiment, I think, with so obviously it takes quite a long time, if you manage it as a theatre performance, to figure out the 500 representatives or even the 50 representatives from this kind of this process. So I imagine them struggling, first of all, because you couldn't do a 500-sided dice. I mean, what are you going to do? How are you going to randomly do this? And they must have done it incredibly boringly painful for ages until they came up with this machine. And I can't remember how long it takes, but it's probably about 20 minutes or something of people running around, putting their name in, sticking it in, balls coming down. It's kind of performative. I think we could also make a 3D model of it, and we could program it so that it's actually available on a smartphone if you want to do it, and you can read out people's names. I think we can do something really interesting with it. But I'd love to see one if you've got a physical model that we could play with, because I do not understand how that thing works. I mean, I've read I've been reading it and saying, okay, you do that, and you can't picture it unless it's tactilely sort of experienced.
It's interesting because a lot of blockchain companies also trying to do. Maxim also mentioned the auto PFGF on chat that basically trying to do something with random and with decisions, and sometimes it really works. Also, we have this the Science Day on the Congress, and I remember it's a tradition for scientists to make a decision on the morning after they drank too much in Greece. So maybe we can also acquire some of these traditions on the Congress to make it a little bit interesting for some participants. Yeah.
I think that was a Babylonian tradition. I can't remember, but yeah, there was this way that certain decisions were considered to be best done by getting drunk and then deciding in the morning.
We need to try to
I mean, it's kind of logical. The idea was that you get passionate, you get creative, you argue, you disagree, and if it's stuck in your brain and it still seems right in the morning when your head hurts, then it's probably a good decision. It's like interesting methodology.
Different kind of stress.
We went to a reenactment of that at the V&A it was at the Goethe Institute in London, and it was a disaster. Everyone got drunk and people started to shout at each other. It was, yeah. But
I think we have problem with Cyprus internet right now, and it's a little bit.
They're kind of back. They're in stop frame.
Yeah, I think it's the
Yeah, it's good.
Does anyone want to correct my history of Solon? Does anyone know what's the I'm quite interested to know how well these characters like Cleisthenes or Solon are taught or are familiar to people in Greece and people in Cyprus. How well is that history known?
Well, as a young person, I would say that we go much in depth in school. We read a lot of Omer, mostly, and actually that is really helpful throughout your life, because you can see these strategies, how they play out in real life as well, and you can actually make more informed decisions if you read these books. We actually had a lot of this type of figures, like coming out of Cyprus. Like, who was that? The capital leader in Vlad, Gideon. There's another Greek leader that it was a famous sheep, like a lord or king of the sea, anyway. And he died. But people were so afraid of him that they kept his head on the sheep. Anyway, it's
kind of scary.
Is it bad? I know we thought getting Cyprus.
For me, it's too far back. It's too school. Talk to me about Plato, Socrates, and those, and that would be my topic. But I it's too far back into the past.
And I think this also actually shows in the Cyprus diaspora and the Cyprus network. If you look at it, like, for example, Greeks, we are very well informed of the Greek philosophy as well, and even the Greek diaspora is very well connected with each other, very proud of their heritage because of that. But I think because of Cyprus, we don't really feel like we come from like an important culture or like a global culture, even though we have figures like Solon and other big figures in history coming out of Cyprus. The diaspora is much weaker in connecting with each other. So actually, I think that it's a very strange thing
that you're talking about, because basically, we are being taught the mainland Greece success stories and all the science and democracy and this and that, but there is so much that happened here in Cyprus as well. But because of the difference of our dialect to the main Greece dialect, sometimes we felt, and it's incorrect, that we're inferior because of the dialect. But that dialect is so rich in its ancient past. And it does take some time to grow. And then at the age of maybe 40 or 50, you're starting to kind of like realize, oh, wait a minute, we do have a lot that we must value and we must embrace.
You have to call them out.
Yeah.
This is, I think, another, way that Cyprus could benefit from all these network state initiatives is that to provide tools for it to bring together that diaspora, maybe through poems or by way of sharing these, modern stories that bring people together and Cypriots together. But of course, it doesn't come out of necessity necessarily, but it's definitely, the diaspora is a huge asset for Cyprus. We are in like 900,000 people in Cyprus, and there's 500,000 of Cypriot diaspora outside. So there's a huge percentage-wise population that is out, and we have a lot to gain from these people, and they want to interact, connect, and engage back with the main ship. But we lack those poems, those stories, those, let's say, rules or virtues that bring us together, and they're not written in stone, they're written by using how we communicate with each other. This is what I would like to see in the future. Coming out of this, hopefully, we inspire some politicians as well to join this movement, and hopefully create a story that brings Cypriots together.
Yeah, I was rather connected to the diaspora recently because I, for one, was in the UK for a long, long time, and at some point felt this ticking clock saying, "Hey, George, come back. Your country wants you. Your family is here. It's a beautiful, sunny country with such beautiful value." And eventually I did come back. And for me, it was, what can I offer back to this country that I love so much? But then the same applies to so many people that we are still connected. Like the organization has been working very closely with what we call Nepomat, which is the youth of the diaspora, all connected together and trying to contribute back in culture, science, and other means. So what you're saying is resonating strong in my heart and many other people's hearts.
Yeah. It also seems that resonate with my heart as Verusian and our diaspora. We have kind of like the same population right now as Cyprus outside of the country. So it's quite also huge, and we're also thinking how to connect it, and we're also trying to involve new technologies to make it happen. And but it's talking about this ancient time and this ancient innovation, it also reminds me our latest future state Congress guide. We talked about hitchhiker guide, and because it's also kind of like authentic that we can use to imagine the future. It's also already existing world, but it's a real world where people really lived for a long time and invent some much tools for living in a more democracy way, and that we also we can use right now to imagine futures that we can be in other planets, that can be in other in 100 years or something. It's already existing world that we can use for our imagination to put it innovation in new interesting way. So that is really cool to have this history, really rich history on Cyprus, and play with it also. That is also one of the points why why we making Congress on Cyprus. So yeah.
And it's basically about two main dimensions that human beings have a real perceptual problem measuring. One is height. So it's always fascinating to me that, like, you know, the highest mountains are just a tiny walk. You know, if you were to walk horizontally, you know, just it's impossible to do, to climb them. You die, you freeze to death if you were to go vertically that distance. But it's just a little stroll for a kid if you were to walk horizontally. So, you know, the world is basically completely flat, you know, round maybe, but flat with tiny elevations. But we see these heights as huge because they're biologically incredibly huge. And the other thing is time. So when we're going back to Cleisthenes, it's probably about 30 conversations you could have with people. If you went to someone and shook their hand and then went to the other person who knew that person when they were alive, and, you know, you're talking about a very small queue of people, which is maybe about, I don't know, 20, 50 meters long or something. Again, a tiny group of people if you were to see them. And if you just had the conversation, oh, what it was like when you were born, and you then had the other one, you'd travel all the way back to his time. And yet to us it seems like so far away. And yet it's just 20 handshakes, 30 handshakes away. Those two perceptions, when we're looking at the planet and evolution, we're looking at the system going to Mars, Moon, the civilization, we have to somehow feel those timescales and feel how much we can change just by meeting 20 people, you know, learning from them, having a conversation, feel that perspective of what's important and what have you, which we as Georgie said before, if our heads are down looking at the smartphone rather than, you know, looking at the shooting stars and the moon and having, you know, a good bottle of ouzo and talking about life, right? You know, it's like that kind of more timeless perspective is obviously the kind of mind frame we need to be in if we're going to jump out of these iterative circular conflicts that we tend to get stuck in, whether it's an argument with family, whether it's a feud between, you know, someone you went to school with or did business with, or a neighboring town, or whether it's between, you know, football teams or tribes. Tribes is another fascinating Greek word, tribes. That's Cleisthenes, by the way. And I really want us to explore the way that he basically used tribes to break up the power, basically the political parties of the time. And political parties, those kind of tribes that we have now, are a big reason why we're stuck. We're just voting for colours and football teams and tribal allegiance, and the power structures and the finance and the sustainability of those things. You look at the word liberal and how it's been used in different political parties around the world, and how it started with one meaning and ends up with a completely opposite meaning just because they're wearing the same colour and use the same, you know, Chelsea Football Club logo or whatever it is. You know, you got the blue tribe and the red tribe, right? And Cleisthenes split that up and did it in a really smart way. And I believe you should probably, like you have term limits on elected politicians often, and you can't get re-elected, political parties should have term limits. You shouldn't be able to run a political party more than 10 years or something like that. Then you should have to disband it and create a new group. These things should not live forever and continue financing and advertising their tribal allegiances to them for no good epistemic reason, because it's just a pollution in the ability for people to have dialogue, make their own assemblies based on things they genuinely believe and agree with, instead of just tribal loyalties. Political parties are a weird thing, and They weren't even considered in the American Constitution at that time. There was no idea that there would be such a thing as two main political parties. The whole thing was written in a way without that consideration.
Will you have political parties in space?
I for one, wouldn't like to see any. Yes.
You need groups. You need group decisions. You need groups to discuss, this group, this group, this group. But these are fluid groups that come and form and enable conversations that you need to have. But they become living power structures which are there to sustain themselves and fight against other power structures, regardless of our interest as individuals. But you still need groups.
Yeah, it should be experts groups that are responsible for something important. For example, this group is responsible for nutrition. This group is responsible for the air quality, and goes on. And you bring in the best, most important experts to do something which is an important job for the good of everybody. And their drive is the sustainability of a society as opposed to personal gain and personal profit, etc. Because if you look into science fiction, there's all these societies that are not driven from personal profit and personal bank balance. It's very different reasons. Take scientists nowadays. What drives them is how many papers they will write and how well they will be respected from their peers. These are better reasons, but also they need some rebalancing, because that can be taken also to a certain extreme.
These are the problems that the decentralized science is trying to also provide a solution for by creating different ways that they can submit new science, new knowledge, and put the incentives in place.
Yes.
The right incentives.
Yes. And even in the today's society where we think that science is so advanced, there is also a certain dogma in, no, you can't speak about that kind of like theory. That's the only theories that is accepted. And then you would have groups that if somebody speaks about that, they will find a way to bring them down because they shouldn't be speaking about that because they're doing damage to this group of scientists. This is not the right way to actually build the future. Because you have,
Will we go to some questions? What do you think?
Yeah. I'm interested how many people from our audience already been in Cyprus. And we really love to have questions. So feel free to mute out yourself and ask anything you want. We're here for this.
Yeah,
it's always shy to make questions. Okay.
Late 90s or early 2000s.
So, would you like to come one more time in Solia?
No, I'm just saying that I only saw it from the eyes of the child. So yeah, for sure, I would love to come. Definitely.
You would be most welcome here.
Thank you.
A unicorn when you look at it on the map.
It looks like a unicorn.
It is in making.
Indeed.
A question during conversation. Yeah.
Well, there's this.
We have this meeting every week. Every week it will be like every new topic. So it's really cool that we had Why Cyprus today. Thank you very much for coming and inviting everybody on Cyprus.
Here in Cyprus.
Ciao, ciao.
See you. Bye-bye.